Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our AM 560 Weather Center, partly sunny, hot, and humid today. We'll top out at 94. Well, we're on the way. 83 at O'Hare, 81 Lakefront. Your next news update is at 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by The Insurance Guy. Tune in Saturday afternoons 4 to 5 for The Insurance Guy with Steve Lischewitz, president of SVL Insurance Group.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
The weekend in celebration of America's birthday. That would be July 4th, 1776, not 1619, for those of you scoring at home.
Thank you.
He really began to frame a choice that Americans have come November 3rd.
In our schools, our newsrooms, even our corporate boardrooms, there is a new far-left fascism that demands absolute allegiance. If you do not speak its language, perform its rituals, recite its mantras, and follow its commandments, then you will be censored, banished, blacklisted, persecuted, and punished. It's not going to happen to us. Make no mistake, this left-wing cultural revolution is designed to overthrow the American Revolution. In so doing, they would destroy the very civilization that rescued billions from poverty, disease, violence, and hunger, and that lifted humanity to new heights of achievement, discovery, and progress. To make this possible, they are determined to tear down every statue, symbol, and memory of our national heritage. That is why I am deploying federal law enforcement to protect our monuments, arrest the rioters, and prosecute offenders to the fullest extent of the law.
The criticism up until that speech of President Trump over the last month had been in part Americans feeling neglected and undefended by the president, even those who are erstwhile supporters. And that speech refocused the choice. You may not like me, but it's me and the rule of law, or it is lawlessness and violence and the leftist mob and the purge coming for you in one form or fashion at your workplace, at your kid's school, or on the streets.
And you don't think eventually the mob is going to try and take over the White House if Biden gets elected? It's a possibility.
Well, if Biden is elected, as our friend Joel Pollack from Breitbart said, what you'll have is Barack Obama staffers implementing Bernie Sanders policies. I mean, the left is giving a wink and a nod to the mob at present. This is why Tammy Duckworth, as we spoke about earlier, is unable to say no, statues of George Washington shouldn't be torn down.
They'll have an autonomous zone on the White House lawn.
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Scott Rasmussen. He's a public opinion pollster, editor-at-large for Ballotpedia, and co-founder of ESPN. I don't know if that's a credential anymore.
Oh, hey,
Scott Rasmussen, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, it's great to be with you this morning.
And one thing that you wrote in a recent op-ed, I just wanted to focus on, and I'll say it so you don't have to as a pollster and have be like, oh, well, just pollsters defending the industry. Real Clear Politics averages projected Hillary Clinton would win by the popular vote by 3.3% in 2016. She won it by 2.1%. 10 of the last 12 national polls released were within 2 percentage points of the actual margin. One of the others overestimated Clinton's margin by 4 points, one underestimated by 4 points. For our Trump supporters listening, as I have said so often on this show, no, polling isn't kabuki theater. No, it isn't black magic. The polls were not that inaccurate, particularly in battleground states. Margin of error, they're snapshots in time. And so I would believe, at least directionally, where some of the polls suggest, if you look at the methodology, make sure it's likely voters and it's demographically representative sample. But the idea of dismissing polls out of hand is absurd, and we should stop indulging people who do so. Really, really stop it. And I'll tell you what, this polling on Joe Biden and his mental state that has 40% of Americans saying that 40% of registered voters saying that he is suffering from early onset dementia. I'm certain that's polling that a lot of Trump supporters will want to believe. So you can't pick and choose. With that said, what about where you have the race right now, and not just the head-to-head competition, and not just even in the battleground states, but sort of the underlying attitudes of voters, what they want and what they don't want, what they like about Trump, what they don't, what they have hope for in Biden, and what they are concerned about?
Well, let's start with, I think the polling, as you just read from my column, was good in 2016, but the analysis was horrible. People simply saw what they wanted to see in the data. Hillary Clinton saw enough that she didn't even know Wisconsin was on the map. So there was a great failure of analysis. And when you look at polls right now, my polling shows that among registered voters, Donald Trump is down by about 10 points to Joe Biden. It's a couple of points closer if you look at likely voters. But I have absolutely no hesitation to say that if the election were held today, in addition to being shocked, the president would lose and control of the Republican Senate would be at risk. The part that people have to understand when they hear that is the election is 17 weeks away. It's not being held today.
Right.
These numbers may change. What is lacking right now is a message from the president and from the Republican side to counter what people see. Look, the Democrats have identified themselves as the party of government, and they have delivered a consistent message about turning more power over to government, having the government set more rules. You may not like the message, but it is very consistent. And a great example has to do with the economy. Right now, a lot of Republicans are saying no new spending. Well, if we match that up against Nancy Pelosi's plan, voters prefer Pelosi's plan to no new spending by a 2-to-1 margin. Why? Because at least she's offering something. People think we're in the midst of a pandemic. They're not hearing an alternative plan. So there is something to that. One proposal that I've done some polling on, the Workplace Recovery Alliance, has this idea that if a government ordered a business to shut down, the government should cover their losses. Well, that's pretty popular, far more popular than Pelosi's plan, but there needs to be a message.
Have you looked into the 6 swing states, and how is Trump doing versus Biden?
Trump is doing a little better in the swing states than he is nationally. But again, if the election were held today, he would still lose some of those critical states and would not be reelected. He does need to change the dynamics. Something has to change. Some of it will be on the ground. But what really happens if the economy comes back strong and the pandemic doesn't? That's good news for the president. But also tying into the president's speech and the comments you made earlier, there's a block of voters out there, 17% of all voters nationwide, 1 out of 6, who really dislike President Trump, but also really dislike tearing down statues of George Washington. These are voters that Joe Biden is counting on showing up to vote for him simply because his name is not Donald Trump. If the president can connect with some of those people, either shift a few of them into staying home or voting for a third party, or maybe even winning a couple over, that can make a huge difference in this election.
Yeah, the important thing that you said, too, right at the outset is about analysis. And I've done enough campaigns, worked with enough pollsters. You can look at numbers, but you have to understand what people are saying and be able to splice the numbers like you just did, the 17% overlap of hate Trump but hate tearing down monuments. So now how do you message to those voters to get them to overcome, for example, their dislike of Trump and their focus on what he is doing to protect America's heritage, for example? And that's where some of the art comes in to complement the science. And so this is interesting, too. This from Pew Research Center. Now, this is just registered voters, but it's a dynamic that's interesting. The percentage of voters who think that Trump is a good or great president is 10 points higher than the percentage of voters who say Biden would be a good or great president. But the percentage of people who say he's a terrible president is also 10 points higher than the percentage of people who think Joe Biden would be a terrible president. They think he'd be sort of mediocre or a little bit less. So it seems to me that speaks to the intensity gap that Biden has and the unfavorable problem that Trump has. Trump supporters are intensely supportive of him, and there's more lukewarm support for Joe Biden. That's a problem for him. But there's intense dislike for President Trump, and the dislike of Joe Biden is a little bit more lukewarm. So that's a problem for Trump. And so then how do you deal with, trying to bring back some people who are intense your way, or particularly when you need to, when the numbers are as big as they are for Trump? And how do you move lukewarm people into warming up?
Well, I think, part of this goes right back to comments you made in the opening about a lot of the president's strongest supporters simply dismiss all polls as fake news. They're convinced that the polls are misleading, that everybody loves the president, and they need to just be harder core. And I understand that feeling, but the reality is the president 4 years ago got 46% of the vote. Only 36% of the vote actually wanted him as president. The other 10% said that he was unqualified to be president, but he was the lesser of two evils. Right now, that group in the population, we identify, they disapprove of this president, but they think things would have been worse if Hillary Clinton had won. Mm-hmm. These are voters that need to be reached out to. These are voters that the president's strongest supporters need to be building bridges to, rather than saying, if you're not with us, you're against us. And that's going to come on a positive message. Some of it will come on the economy. Some will come on cultural issues. And again, we can't overlook the fact that this isn't a stage. Real world events are going to impact this in a big way. Right now, when I ask voters, what are the top three issues? The top two are the same as they've been forever: the economy and health care. Mm-hmm. Third right now is civil rights. Fourth is law and order. If those last two flip, right now, if people see the protests and the discussions and what's going on as a legitimate expression of concern over America's history of racial inequality, that's really good news for Joe Biden. He wants people thinking about that issue. If it flips to law and order and to a sense that there is a violent mob that wants to overthrow the United States, well, that becomes much better for President Trump. And that's going to be determined by what happens in the protests and by the way this plays out and by the way the political leaders respond to it.
Well, this is the first time we've had a presidential campaign during a pandemic. So Joe Biden has said he's not going to go out and campaign at all. So how do you do this? Just completely via social media or?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, that is going to be an issue. Joe Biden has said he will debate the president. That will be one opportunity. But the other aspect of it is it's not just the two candidates. It is their teams, both in political candidates, but also their supporters. When you have supporters on either side, if you're a member of the resistance or if you're the staunchest supporter of President Trump, then you go out and do something or say something that can be characterized negatively, that creates a problem for your team. It creates a narrative. And I think what needs to happen is the Republicans in particular right now need to come up with a positive message that can unite their base and also bring in a few of those other people. The president needs to focus on that, delivering that positive message and forcing Biden to respond to it, rather than just sort of letting the narrative flow along. Again, right now, Democrats are the party of government now. They clearly believe that. They have clearly articulated that. The Republicans don't have as clear a definition of who they are.
Mm. How concerning should it be to Joe Biden that 40% of all voters think that he has early onset dementia? I mean, he had that presser the other day last week, What about, he's asked the question about his mental acuity, and he says, they test for my mental acuity every day. That's not a great answer.
Wow.
That expresses concern. And so, if people don't feel like you passed the threshold test of like he or she is competent to do the job, physically able to do the job, then that seems to me an existential threat to his candidacy.
Well, it is a potential threat. It does raise the importance of who he nominates to be his vice president, because that will be an issue. But I would also remind you of 2016. There were lots of speculation and lots of concern about Hillary Clinton's health, but it didn't really reach a critical point until there was video of her, fainting or collapsing after a rally and being helped into the Secret Service van. There was a moment that crystallized it. All the talking in the world about that isn't going to change things. And part of that, a number that gets that big is because it's a partisan response. Again, the president's base is going to say, of course, Joe Biden is out of touch. Of course, he's clueless, and it's because he has dementia. But you want to reach to other people who are saying, well, he's a little older, but not that bad.
Well, wait a second. But hold on a second there. Joe Biden, independents 56-44, more likely versus less likely. Think Joe Biden has early onset dementia. 56-44. So it's more than just a partisan issue, number one. Number two, it's different than Hillary Clinton because that was like physical ailments. This is mental ailments, and you see it every time Joe Biden speaks. It's different.
Well, and again, if there is a crystallizing moment, that will happen. When you poll independents, really important part of the analysis that you're bringing up, you do have to remember that most people who are technically politically independent lean one way or the other. So that's why you get more muted responses. And I'm not diminishing the concerns that are there about Joe Biden, but right now they are not a defining issue of the campaign, primarily because just as Donald Trump, was not Hillary Clinton, a lot of people, about a quarter of his voters, didn't think he was qualified to be president, but they voted for Donald Trump because he was less of a problem than Hillary Clinton. They thought she was unqualified as well. And right now, if there is a perception that both of these men are older and out of touch, then the advantage goes to the challenger.
He is Scott Rasmussen, public opinion pollster, editor-at-large for Ballotpedia, co-founder of ESPN. Scott, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
So I was doing yard work the other day, leaning over a prickly bush, holding a heavy pair of electric hedge trimmers, sweat dripping off of me, and thinking to myself, how is it that we've come to loving yard work so much? I think the answer is, aside from being outside in God's handiwork, we love yard work because we love the immediate results and the feeling we get when the job is done. It's Ryan, and at our Faith and Family Mortgage team, helping you with a refinance or cash out refinance is similar. A lot of people don't want to do it because they don't want the short-term sweat. But when you consider that rates are historically low, and when you consider that our company has a direct lender advantage, getting to use its own money within its own walls, and how that often leads to a better rate and monthly savings for you, the end feeling could definitely be worth it. Plus, we'll do most of the hard work for you. We are United Faith Mortgage.
We pay your appraisal fees up to $500.
United Mortgage Corp, Melville, New York. NMLS number 1330. Ryan Vrecka, NMLS number 65233. For all licensing information, go to nmlsconsumeraccess.org.
Is it time to have your sump pump checked? Hi, this is John with Basement Flood Protector. I'm a veteran and the owner. Since 1974, we've manufactured the most reliable and highest quality products and provided unmatched basement waterproofing and sump pump service to the Chicagoland area. Most problems with water in your basement have to do with your sump pump. Maybe it's old, doesn't work properly, or you just need more capacity. Most pumps should be replaced every 3 to 5 years. With our pumps, we recommend replacement every 7 to 10 years. At Basement Flood Protector, we offer a complete line of sump, ejector,